Hi everyone, you're watching the virtual Amicus and I'm Jay Lodha. So today's topic for discussion would be on common mistakes investment advisories commit. And so today we are joined by a counsel who has an illustrious litigation profile and an illustrious litigating career. Today we are joined by Mr. Vedchetan Patil. And just to give you all a brief introduction about our Amicus for today's session, Mr. Patil is a alumni of Government Law College, Mumbai, and has 10 years of extensive experience in litigation and transactional advisory. He specializes in civil commercial litigation. He's practicing counsel at Bombay High Court, NCLT Mumbai, Securities Appellate Tribunal Mumbai. He has many reported judgments to his credit. One of the specialized focus of his area of practice is investment advisory law. Mr. Vedchetan Patil is currently handling a portfolio, both legal and compliance, of more than 17 investment advisors on regular basis and intends to further expand his practice into this field. Thank you so much, Mr. Patil, for taking out time. Really very sorry we ruined your Saturday evening. One day that you get from your busy schedule to spend and be with your family. So sorry for spoiling that. And anything that you wish to say before we start with our segment?
Thank you so much, Jay. In fact, it is my pleasure to join you today. And trust me, the litigation in Bombay, the Saturdays are never off, even the Sundays are never off. So, in fact, yeah, you may say that it may be a slight divergence from the normal routine, but it is a little divergence which I would love to have again and again with you, especially with you, Jay. Thank you so much for having me today. Yes.
Thank you so much, sir, for the kind words. I think the stage is set. The floor is all yours, sir. Over to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Jay. So, Jay, as we've decided for the today's topic, the common mistakes that investment advisories commit. So, let us first understand what is this business of investment advisory. It is comparatively a new business wherein I'm sure everybody, all the viewers are aware that you have stockbrokers, where you hold your demat accounts, you trade, but then there are also people, your friend in the family, your mama, your cow, somebody who will tell you, invest into this stock, this is going to rise, Reliance is going to go up, Adani is going to go down, do this, do that. Now, at a certain level, this business or this advisory practice was institutionalized. Once this practice was institutionalized, naturally it was commercialized. After the commercialization of this practice, because the practice is related to the investment, related to the securities market, somewhere in the year 2013, SEBI came up with a new set of regulations wherein they enacted investment advisory regulations of 2013, and then they have specified and prescribed certain do's and don'ts. So naturally, what is an investment advice? The regulations define it as an advice that is relating to the investing in, purchasing, selling, or otherwise dealing into the securities or investment products, and advice on investment portfolio containing securities or investment products, whether such advice is given into written, oral, or through any other means of communications, then such advice will be treated as investment advice. And of course, any advice given over the counter to a friend for a non-commercial purpose will not be treated as investment advice. Now, once this investment advice is defined, any entity, any person, whether individual in his personal capacity for a commercial gain, or any body corporate in their institutional capacity, of course, for the commercial gain, the moment you give that advice, you directly fall under the investment advisory regulations 2013. Now, naturally, because these regulations are new, the practice into under this regime is also new. And as you're aware that the Indian mindset is always to try and bypass the regulations or try and bypass and somehow remain non-compliant. The constant chase of SEBI and the investment advisories is to keep the investment advisories regulated and under a proper systematized control. We have seen, especially in cities like Indore, Bhopal, Ahmedabad, the investment advisory business has been mushrooming because with time and with the advent of technology, a lot of newcomers are there into the market. These newcomers normally do not have adequate legal advice. They go, they work with some investment advisories. They realize that this is an easy game and you can make a quick buck out of it. They start their own independent organizations, at times without taking SEBI registration. Now, by virtue of the SEBI regulations of 2013, any activity related to the investment advisory for commercial purposes has been strictly if you conduct that activity without obtaining appropriate registration under the regulations, then you are liable for prosecution under the relevant rules and regulations. Now, having said that, even the entities which have obtained the registration under the regulations of 2013 and now under the new amendment, even those entities find it difficult to remain compliant with these regulations because the compliances are very minute, very intricate, and very specific. Earlier, under the 2013 regime, so now the entire regulations are the law relating to the investment advisories is divided into. If I may take the liberty of dividing it into the two regions, is prior to 2020 amendment and post 2020 amendment. Now, prior to 2020, when the 2013 regulations, let alone unamended regulations, were in force, an investment advisory was expected to carry out certain procedural requirements at the time of onboarding of a client. Now, what are those procedural requirements? These are natural standard operating procedures like completion of a KYC, risk profiling, suitability assessment. Now, in my personal experience, I have seen that in umpteen number of cases, at least 20% of the clients of the advisories, the customers of the advisories, the advisories do not have their KYCs, their PAN cards, their risk profiling completed. Now, why is that so? It's naturally that's the demand of the business. Somebody is onboarded only for a period of 1 week. Naturally, he's not interested in completing his KYC and you as an advisory do not do that because you may lose the client because he only intends to onboard for a period of 7 days. He is not inclined to go through the rigorous and the tedious procedure of KYC and risk profiling. That is the reason you remain non-compliant. Now, what is this gamut of risk profiling? What is the common mistakes with reference to the risk profiling and the suitability assessments that the advisories normally commit, which we have seen into our own personal experience? First is that you onboard the client through a KYC. How is the KYC done? Naturally, there is a normal form of KYC. You fill in that form, you take the PAN card, you upload it into your database, the KYC is completed. Similarly, for the risk profiling, there is a risk profiling form. Who has prepared that form? SEBI, under the IA regulations, has given certain guidelines for the purpose of risk profiling, wherein you have to take into consideration various factors like the age of the client, their financial position, their assets, their liabilities, their previous experience into the stock market. We have seen that in umpteen number of cases that even the risk profiling form is cut short. It is cut short only with an intent to fasten or to speed up the client onboarding process. Now, naturally, you cut short on 1 or 2 questions, you become non-compliant. You're liable for prosecution. You're liable for inspection. You're liable for action under the SEBI regulations. Even when the risk profiling forms are complete, your marking system is not up to the date. That is another most common mistake which we have seen investment advisories commit. Even when the marking system is up to date, we have noticed that the risk profiling form, which by law is mandatory for an IA to communicate to its clients. Normally, IAs do not communicate it back. They make the client sign the form or on a teleconversation, the wealth counselor or the advisor or the representative of the advisor, he asks the questions to the client. They fill in the form, they do their marking, and keep the form with themselves. The forms are not signed by the client. So essentially, what the law requires is that the risk profiling form has to be communicated to the client. It has to be signed by the client, and it has to be accepted by the client. After the risk profiling, you are expected to then advise Now, here is another biggest mistake which the investment advisors commit. And that is that you first sell the product and then you onboard. Now, under the 2020 regime post amendment, the SEBI has further clarified that you cannot charge even a single rupee to your client unless you sign the agreement, complete the risk profiling and KYC. But so that, I mean, that is a separate issue which we will discuss in the later part of our discussion. What is necessary here is that you complete the KYC, you complete the risk profiling, and post risk profiling, you advise the product, and not vice versa. Now, risk profiling has to be communicated to the client, and it has to and the communication has to be a written communication and not an oral communication. Further, under the IA regulations, every advisory is expected to have a suitability assessment for the products advised for each client. Now, what is this suitability assessment? As per the regulations, you are expected that when you advise a particular client, when you advise a particular product to your client, the rationale for such advice has to be recorded into the suitability assessment. Now, instead of recording that rationale into your suitability assessment, what do the advisories normally do? They take a suitability waiver from the clients. They say that, okay, now I'll explain the concept of risk profiling. The risk profiling is essentially a window for an investment advisory to look out and see what is the risk appetite of my client. Whether if my client is rich, if my client has a lot of money, if my client has enormous amount of experience into the trading world, I will categorize him based upon the marking system. I will categorize him as a client with a high risk appetite. If my client is, let's say, a 70-year-old man living on a pension of 10,000 rupees per month, I would categorize him as a client with a low risk appetite. And if my client is in between both of them, I would categorize him as a client with medium risk appetite. Similarly, I am expected, when I say I am the advisory, when I'm expected, similarly, I'm also expected to categorize my products. Now, what are my products? My products may be a customized portfolio or maybe a standardized portfolio where I'm recommending 10 scripts into different segments. And I will regularly advise my clients to churn them. I'll regularly advise my clients for re-leveling or correction of the scripts to manage the overall performance of the portfolio. My another product would be an intraday segment, which is naturally a high risk product. So a client with a low risk appetite should not be advised, should not be given in advice a product with high risk appetite. This is essentially what we need to understand. But on ground, what we see is that I as a client of an investment advisor, I may be categorized as a low risk appetite client, but I may intend to still go and execute intraday because why? I just felt like I want to do this business, or maybe some of the the person who is in touch with me from the investment advisor, he has convinced me that I will make more profits and maybe I want to trade into this. Now, as per the investment advisory regulations, the suitability assessment comes into picture. Now, because my risk profiling does not permit the IA to advise this intraday product or this high risk product to be, hence the IAs have developed their own practice of getting a suitability waiver from me. Now, even while getting this suitability waiver from me, they do not adequately advise me as a client of the IA that this product is not suitable for me. However, I still intend to take this product. Instead of, the whole practice of doing the suitability assessment is limited to this. This is one of the biggest mistakes the investment advisors commit. On the contrary, I suggest that the suitability assessment has to be a well-documented version of your reasons and your rationale of advising a particular product to a particular client. I understand that in the instance when a product is being subscribed by a client as against their risk appetite, you may take a suitability waiver. But in each and every instance, suitability waiver is not an answer. And in coming times, you will see, and recently, SEBI has in fact taken action against various advisories, registered investment advisories, for not having appropriate suitability assessment. Moving forward, we have also seen that uh, especially under the new regime, when it is now mandated to have an agreement signed, it is now mandated to do the risk profiling and communicate the risk profiling. Still, the IAs are committing again the same mistakes of not having KYC or the updated KYCs. For example, recently we faced an example, we faced a problem where a particular client, where we were investigating into one of the investment advisors entire portfolio, and we have realized that at least in 20% of the cases the KYC forms were incomplete. Why were they incomplete? Because they were imported from CKYC. Now, under CKYC, maybe at times there was a technical glitch, maybe at times the documents uploaded on the CKYC were not uh, adequately uploaded. Now, in the instance when you import data from any other KYC portal for the purpose of your clients, and if you realize that the data is not adequate on the CKYC portal, then you are expected to complete the form, to complete the documentation and the procedure of KYC and then upload it. You can't remain or maintain the status quo of having an incomplete KYC. Further, most of the IAs, and I tell this with so much of conviction, most of the IAs are not aware about the KYC requirements and the differences that are to be different procedures that are to be followed for the KYC of an individual and a non-individual client. For example, if I'm not mistaken, under the October 5, 2011 circular of SEBI, the KYC for a body corporate, for a trust, for a HUF, for a partnership firm, the KYC requirements are altogether different as compared to the KYC requirements of an individual client. So let's say, for example, any investment advisor onboards a private limited company. You are not just expected to take their PAN card of or the board resolution, but you are also expected to take their policy, the investment policy of the private limited, the body incorporated company. You're also expected to take the financials and the balance sheets of the last 2 years and then check whether those financials, those investment policies are in alignment with your investment product which you have sold to that particular company. Similarly, moving forward, these KYC related normal norms, most of the IAs do not follow onto the basics of acquiring or obtaining all the required documentations, especially from the body corporates, from the partnership firms, from the HUFs, and of course the confusion remains, when it comes to proprietorship. I mean, that's a separate topic. We can discuss it on some other occasion. I have already discussed the issue with reference to the risk profiling, and most of the IAs do not have the adequate or substantive questionnaire as required under the IA guidelines. Another most common mistake which we have seen is that under the IA regulations, every investment advisor is expected to use the word investment advisor as a suffix to its name. Let's say, for example, you have a private limited company, ABC Private Limited, which is registered and which has obtained the investment advisory certificate and registration from the SEBI. Now, you are expected to either amend your original name, that is, instead of ABC Private Limited, you should become ABC Investment Advisors Private Limited, or you should work under a brand name of, let's say, XYZ Investment Advisors, owned and controlled by ABC Private Limited. Now, this is something which is not at all followed, at least by, if I'm not mistaken, 50 to 70% of the investment advisors, to my personal knowledge. Now, the same term, same suffix of investment advisor has to be part of your all the communications, which is another common mistake which most of the investment advisories commit. Moving forward, as we have already discussed the suitability assessment, we have already discussed the risk profiling. Moving forward, IAs are also expected to have a detailed written down procedures for the client due diligence policy, for the related party transactions, for the rationale for arriving at investment advice. Now, when I say rationale for arriving at investment advice, it means that every investment advice which you give to your client, the IA should have a written down procedure that when I advise you to buy, let's say Adani Ports, if I'm advising you to buy Adani Ports, why did I advise you to buy Adani Ports today? Was there any recent development into that segment? Was there any recent development into that particular company? All these things have to be written down and the records have to be maintained. Further, I mean, again, I'm again jumping back to the KYC. Even you need to have a written down procedure for the completion of the KYC procedure. You need to have a written down. You need to have a written procedure for the purpose of risk profiling and risk assessment. That when you say that you have 10 questions into your risk profile, the rationale for putting each question and the objective of each question, the rationale for both these propositions put together has to be written down into your records, and those records have to be maintained. And most importantly, most of the investment advisors do not have any internal policy for addressing the conflict of interest. Now, conflict of interest is one of the most interesting, and of course, it will be a time-consuming topic which we can discuss at a detailed length further. But the procedure for addressing the conflict of interest has to be not only be in a written procedural format, but all your employees should also be trained to address the conflict of interest. And there has to be internal mechanism of reporting for the purpose of addressing the conflict of interest. Moving forward, this is not something which every IA would face, but only the IAs which also provide the execution services. Now, it is I'm sure everybody is aware, but most of the IAs who provide execution services, it is mandated under law that both the departments of the execution and the investment advisory has to be segregated. But the law does not stop at only segregation. It also requires you to have an internal mechanism along with a written procedure, that how do you consistently maintain the segregation between both the entities. So you may have one body corporate which is executing both the businesses. One is the execution services and another is the investment advisory services. So it is one thing to say that I'm operating both the businesses from two separate offices, but of course, in today's world, two separate offices does not mean complete segregation. Segregation goes a little beyond that, and apart from segregation, you need to have a policy for segregation, and you need to have a mechanism for maintenance of such segregation of both the activities. Further, Jay, proceeding. Under the IA regulations, every investment advisor is expected to communicate the disclosures adequately. Now, what are these disclosures? These disclosures are, of course, about the risk factors. These disclosures are about the holding positions of the company, of the investment advisor, which is advising a particular script. For example, today I am sending out a tip to my clients that on so and so date you should buy a particular script, stop loss at so and so, and the target profit is of so and so, or if I'm advising it for a long term, for a 3 months time or 6 months time or 1 year's time. And many IAs follow the practice of publishing the research reports. Now, in these research reports or in these advices, I have to adequately disclose to them what is my holding position into that particular script. Now, this is where most of the IAs commit the mistake, because especially into the segments of intraday, and we have also noticed that most of the IAs also convince their clients to, especially the small advisory entities who work with a capacity of, let's say, 15, 20, 25 staff. They also convince their clients that why they should follow the advice given by them is also because they themselves are executing that trade. Now, this is where the catch comes, that you advise your client to buy a particular script, you also buy the same script, and yet you do not disclose your position. Now, what happens is, we have seen recently in one of the complications where there was some action taken against one of our clients, is that they were executing similar trades where where the IA was executing trades, advising the same trades to the clients, but before it was advised to the clients to exit from a particular position, the IA would exit, naturally taking out more profits. Now, this amounts to conflict of interest. This amounts to acting against your own advice. Like, why would you exit from a particular script and allow your customer to continue with that script for a day or two, or a particular period? Another mistake which we have noticed, which is commonly seen amongst the IAs, is that most of the time research reports are not signed by the research team. Now, this is something really important. It is expected that every research report should be properly signed and properly communicated. Further, most IAs, especially the IAs functioning into the small towns, we have noticed that they are completely not aware about the applicability of the Prevention of Money Laundering Act. Now, the Prevention of Money Laundering Act is essentially applicable to all the SEBI registered intermediaries, and every SEBI registered intermediary, and IA being one of them, has to have a AML policy, anti-money laundering policy, in place. Now, if you go to any small town based IA and ask them whether they have a anti-money laundering policy in place, the answer will be obviously a big no. Now, this is very important for all the investment advisors, especially who are functioning into different regions of India and are not adequately advised on this aspect, that you need to have an anti-money laundering policy in place. You need to have you need to have a separate compliance officer, a principal officer. You need to have a specialized mechanism for addressing the money laundering issues for which your entity may be used as a scapegoat. Whether you are used or not, that is a different issue, but a policy has to be in place because that is the mandate under the law. Going forward, Jay, especially talking about the anti-money laundering policy, the policy has to be exhaustive, and it has to cover various aspects, such as the measures which will be taken for the purpose of continuous client due diligence. So please note, there is one part is client due diligence, and then there is continuous client due diligence. Then the mechanism for addressing any suspected transaction, any transaction which can have any relationships with the terror funding, any transactions undertaken by the politically exposed person. Now, these are very minute and small issues. These are very niche issues which IAs as such, being only on the advisory front, may not be in a position to completely address. But these issues are something very serious, and they have to be addressed, because if at all your uh, your services are being manipulated to be you. Sorry for this. I need to rephrase this. If at all any IA is used as a vessel for a terror funding, or if at all any IA services are used as a vessel for the purpose of money laundering, then naturally the problems that will come up would be very, very serious. Uh, Moving forward, uh, apart from what I've already stated, IAs are also expected to have uh, you know the client due diligence policy, a written procedure for client due diligence, a written procedure for things like issuance and collection of checks, a written procedure for things like how would one keep in control or prevent acceptance or issuance of funds from sources which are not your clients. Let's say, for example, I am a customer of a particular investment advisor, and I have subscribed to a particular product of an investment advisor, but I decide to pay from my wife's account or from my friend's account. Now, that is not something which is allowed under the regulations and rules. For that, how would an IA keep a check on these issues? For that, you need to have a written down mechanism, especially under the new regime of the 2020, wherein in fact now there are a couple of more problems under the new regime. You cannot accept funds even from the payment gateways. Now earlier, people could pay, you send a payment link, click on that link, enter your credit card details, make a payment. Now under especially under the September 23 2020 circular, even these payment gateways, it is advised under the new circular that the IS should not be taking payment from the payment gateways where the audit trail cannot be maintained. So all these things put together, uh, to conclude this small discussion, uh, it is very important for every business owner of a IA that he remains compliant on each front. It is very important for each IA, or especially the management of the IA, that they should personally see to it that they remain compliant by reading the IA regulations, by taking proper legal advice, and maintaining all the required standards and procedures which are expected to be required under the IA regulations of 2013 and as amended under 2020, and of course various other circulars that have been issued from time to time. So thank you so much, Jay. Jay?
Thank you so much, sir. Once again, there was some technical glitch that I was facing. Yeah.
Okay. I hope I was audible throughout.
Absolutely, sir. Thank you so much for your valuable insights on this subject. I'm sure your able guidance and the way you took off from the very start. I think this segment will benefit not just the advisories who are in a habit of committing those mistakes, but also to all the viewers who've been watching, to all the law students. And if I may ask one question, sir, how would one approach this as a career? How did you decide personally to take this up as a field of specialization? If you talk about
Accidental.
through your personal experience, how did you land up? Was it accidental, or did you plan to be?
It was no. What happened is that in 2013, when these regulations were firstly enacted, in fact, I have the privilege of taking up the first litigation under the IA regulations. So it has been accidental, if I may say so. And of course, because in 2013 14 we had just started our independent practice, and when one of my colleagues had approached me for some issue they had faced under the IA regime of 2013. We addressed that legal issue, and we had resolved it. And because this business was mushrooming by then, I am using the term mushrooming, in places like Indore there are more than 300 investment advisors. In places like Ahmedabad, there are more than 200 investment advisors. In fact, I think in cities like Bombay or Delhi, there are lesser number of investment advisors, but in small towns there are a lot more, and a lot more are there who are unregistered. Altogether, I believe there are around 1,200 registered investment advisors, and I believe there are around 5,000 unregistered investment advisors who are doing this business. See, what I see, Jay, is that uh, I have seen a lot of people, uh, uh, who have been working with the investment advisors for 1 or 2 years. You realize that you can do this business on your own. So after taking experience of 2-3 years, you directly jumpstart. So what people have been doing is that uh, I work with you for 2 years. I gain adequate experience. I form a team from your company. I form a team of 10-15 people, and we say, let's start our own business. We go out, we start our own business, and within 6 months' time, the turnover is 1 crore. Within 1 year's time, the turnover is 3 crores. And that's not a small amount which we are talking about, especially for the employees who were working at a salary of 25,000, 50,000, or maybe at the most 70,000. So that is how this business has exploded. And how I came into this is, naturally I got relief for my first client. He sent second, third, fourth, and it has been going on since then. And how does one take this up as a career? I believe you cannot take this practice per se as a career in itself. It has to be a part of your entire gamut of entire matrix of your profile. And naturally, if the work related to the IA increases, and if you keep on delivering, this is a never-ending business. So if any of the students, or if any of your team members would want to further get in touch on this issue, of course we can discuss it. And but of course, I'm sure you're aware that in litigation, one follows the other, or the other follows the suit. So yeah.
So true, sir. So our email is mentioned on the channel in case any of the viewers who are watching this have any queries pertaining to any of the fundamental concepts with respect to this issue. Feel free to write to us. We'll be forwarding the same as it is to our amicus for today's session, Mr. Vedchetan Patil, and we'll revert as and when we can. So thank you so much, sir, once again. Sharing experiences and sharing expertise, sharing knowledge. I think that is what these knowledge platforms are all about. That is what the virtual amicus is all about. It always helps. It has helped me personally, and I'm sure it will help all the viewers who are watching this as well. Thank you so much, sir. It really means a lot for taking out time on a Saturday evening and featuring on one of our segments. Anything that you wish to say towards the end before we wrap up?
No, pleasure. It was pleasure talking to you, Jay. It was amazing session. Though it was, I endeavored to keep it short because of some commitments, but definitely I would love to have a longer and a more detailed session, and definitely on this topic itself. And we can, and I'm sure if anyone wants to get in touch with me about how to develop a further career onto IAS, I would be more than glad to help them. And I'm sure you can also personally try and explore this option in
Yes,
Jaipur.
definitely.
This is one of the good career opportunity for the lawyers also.
Definitely.
This business.
Absolutely, sir. I'll definitely keep that in mind, and every minute of the session was definitely worth it. So thank you so
Pleasure.
much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you so much, sir.
And stay tuned, everybody. Next episode is on its way. Stay home, stay safe. COVID is still around. It's goodbye for now. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.